my history with Def Leppard is that basically I started my start in my career. Might as well just give you that basic. I was working in Ireland with my brother, who was a DJ at the time, and but he was playing more. He was playing more sort of, music, like, rock music and stuff like that. It wasn't a disco, if you went to see if you went to a nightclub to listen to him, you listened to, the Eagles, Steely Dan, Led Zeppelin. He'd play Led Zeppelin prior to him sort of, getting the thing going. He'd play a bit of Pink Floyd, just a track. And Ireland was very, it was quite backward at the time, in that sense of rock music, because it was a tiny island. And so basically, he was introducing that into the country and stuff. So he had a mobile disco and he made his own equipment, and I helped, as a kid, and just grew into it. And so then, we went to see Pink Floyd in 1974. We went to see them at Nebworth, doing Dark Side of the Moon, and we camped out, did all that. I was still a kid, so. I was at that stage, I was 17, 18, so he and I were part of that 80,000 people that watched that. And I sat there and was just blown away with it. And I came away from that basically saying, I got to do, I have to continue this. This is not, I had trained as a tool and die maker up to that. And it was a 5-year sort of training period. And I got to the 4th year, which, and I have to say, it stood to me since, because I understand, staging and all that, because, I was operating lathes and, milling machines and all these sort of things, when it was all done by hand as opposed to computerized now, And so, that gave me the practical side of it. So basically, anyway, he was sort of winding it down. And he just said, he says, I think I've had enough of this. And so the equipment was sitting there. And so another guy that we knew here in Ireland, he was running just a hotel basement. And they had bands on a Tuesday night, and it was called the Much More Music Gig. Again, it was focused more on rock, So there was a lot of cover bands within there. They covered different sort of genres of music and whatever. And he met me at a gig, and it was at another show that we were both sort of at. And he just said, "What happened to your lights?" And I said, "Well, they're still there." And the lights were like par 36s and stuff. They were horrendous little things, and they were all homemade, and it was like awful, But anyhow, he says, "Listen, could you bring them down the gig? Because we've nothing." And I went, "Of course I can," So I brought them down every Tuesday night, and basically. I didn't have any, I'd literally just plug them in, and have switches on the sockets sort of thing, to turn them on and off. And then I wired some bell buttons, that I could flash them, and so I brought them down anyhow. And next thing all these different bands come through, and one band, the singer comes up to me and he says, "What's the story with your lights?" And I said, they're homemade. And he says, "I can tell that." He says, "But we've nothing." He says, he says, "But it looks great." He says, "Would you, can we rent them?" And I said, "Talk to me, brother." So he, that was that. And basically, he spoke to my brother, and my brother was saying, "Yeah, I'm packing it up." And he says, "Well, look," he says, "we need a van, we need lights and all that." He says, "But we'll do a deal with you so long as your brother comes with it." So it's like, it was almost like, that sort of situation. So anyhow, they said, yeah, no problem. We'll figure it out. So that band is a band called the Boomtown Rats, and basically Sir Bob Geldof, the guy that created Live Aid, etc., he's the singer from that band.
Yeah, wow. So this was them at the beginning.
This was them at the beginning in a bar in Ireland.
Wow.
So I basically started with them.
Wow.
And we went off, we went around the country in the van, and I'd go back to work on a Monday morning, and my eyes would be falling out of my head, and I'd be like, "Oh, for heaven's sake, what am I doing?" But anyhow, I just loved it so much. So we drove up and down the country all over the place and had a great time. And so eventually, anyway, they did a demo. They took it to England. They come back, and I said to him, I said, so what happened? He says, oh, no, nobody liked it, you know? And I said, so is that it? And he went, no. He says, if you knock on enough doors long enough and hard enough, some fucker will answer it. You know? So basically, he went back to England and himself and the manager and came back with a record deal.
Wow.
Well, they came back with interest, and they had Richard Branson, who was Virgin Airlines and Virgin everything. He flew over. Him and Simon Draper, they flew over to see the band. And I always remember we went to this place afterwards. It was like a snooker club, and he handed him a check for £1 million at the time. And this is in 1976.
Wow.
And we all literally just went, oh my God, you know?
Wow.
And Geldof just went, he says, yeah, right, well, you know, we'll talk about it. And the next thing anyhow is he handed it back to him and he says, we can do better.
Wow.
And it was mind-blowing, you know? So it was like, holy shit, you know? So anyway, they went off back to England. And the next thing, this other company came over and they signed the Rats and for more than $1 million back then. And that was it. So he turned to me and he says, look, he says, you know, come to England with us. Come on. You're part of it. It's like the six of us, the six of the band. He says, the manager and you, come on, let's go to England. Come with us. We have a house and everything that we're all going to live in. And I went, no. You know, I'm training as a tool maker. I said, so, you know, I said, I've only got a year left. And he says, you're a tool. You'll never get to the maker. Fuck you. Come on. So basically, that's it. I decided, you know, he's probably right. So I left with him and went to England. And next thing, the Boomtown Rats exploded. And 60 years later, I had my, not 60 years later, but 40 years later, whatever, I had my birthday, my 60th birthday. And in the middle of the party, you know, my wife and children threw the party for me. In the middle of the party, the music went down and in marched all of the Boomtown Rats.
No way. That's great. That's great.
They had a big refuse sack, you know, and Geldof was carrying it. And he said, tonight, he says, he got the microphone as he does. And he says, you know, I know all he is know him and whatever. He says, but to know a man, you have to live with him. And we lived with the bastard for 3 years.
Wow.
And as you can see, we're still great friends. So tonight, he says, we want to present him with something that he says we all agreed was the first great impression we had of him. And the fact was that he had these homemade lights and everything like that, but he had no way of switching them. So he had lots of four-way strips that basically he would plug in and out the lights in time with the music. So tonight we're presenting him with the Golden Plugboard Award. And this is
that's what you have behind you. That is great. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, that was my first switching.
So that's literally what you were doing, was plugging in and out.
I was plugging in and out, literally time with music, you know, because there was no, you know, lighting deck for theaters and, you know, it was fades and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and then I grew with them and, you know, basically went to the UK and learned a lot and everything like that. And then, you know, they were in a great situation, etc. And then next thing, you know, I decided, hang on a second, you know, I need more money here. So Geldof and I went at it because I never dealt with the manager. I dealt with him, you know. And I wanted $10 a week more, £10 a week more. And he told me to go fuck myself. And, you know, so we got into it. And then I got another gig. And I just said, well, fuck you then. Stick the Rats up your arse. And and that was it, you know. So it was, we parted company and he was furious, you know. But I went off and I did an Undertones tour straight after that, who were a great Irish punk band. And just as I was leaving to do that, I got a call to go and meet Peter Mensch, who basically was the manager of Def Leppard at the time. So
what year would have this been?
This is 1980. And so I met with him, and he says, so what would you do for my band? And I said, well, I'd do this and that and the other, and I'd blah, blah, blah. And he went, so where's your lighting plot? And I said, I only got the call to come here. So I said, I haven't got a lighting plot. He says, well, I got this from so-and-so. And I said, okay. I said, hold your horses there. I said, just let's calm down 1 second. And he says, well, you can't show me this. And I said, okay, you're right. I can't show you that. I don't have the equipment and whatever, and I didn't have the time to research the band or anything else. I said, but I just know I can do a better job than anybody else. And he went, really? And I said, yeah. I said, okay, so this looks great. It's a big drawing. It's a huge, full blueprint. Looks fantastic, doesn't it? Yeah. I said, explain it to me. He says, I can't explain it. I said, then why should you be, you're awed by a picture, I said, shame on you. I said, I have a background of doing the Rats, and I did a lot of punk gigs during the time. I did one-offs with the Stranglers and all these other bands, and I said, and my timing is great. And I said, a great show is about timing, and I said, that's what it's about. I said, you can put a plot like that, give it to someone that just puts up the lights and couldn't give a shit.
Yeah.
And he says, what do you mean? And I said, you know exactly what I mean. I said, you are taken by a presentation. And I said, whatever your background is, that's what you expect. But reality is, I said, a guitar player can play a piece on tape or whatever for you if you're looking for a guitar player, and it'll impress you. I said, however, when you hear him live, it's a totally different thing. I said, when you see me operate, it'll be a totally different thing. And he just loved my ballsy approach, and he, and I said, I'll scribble something down for you. No problem. I said, but it still mean the same as that. I said, it just won't look as good. I said, because I don't have the money for the printer and all that shit.
Yeah.
So he just liked my approach, and he just went, okay, I'm in. Start with us. So I started with them on the first show we did was the 5th of April in 1980. And so basically we went out on that, and Jake Berry was the production manager. I was the lighting designer, and we went out and did the tour. Robert Allen was the tour manager, and Robert basically, Peter put me onto Robert. Robert then took me up to meet the band, and Robert was Rick's brother, so he was the tour manager for the band. Robert today is no longer a tour manager. He's part management for Taylor Swift. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's with Taylor's parents. He is the guy there.
Wow.
So basically, anyhow, we went. I met him. We, discussed everything and whatever. And I started with them in April, and off we went. So we did that tour, which was On Through the Night tour. And we did that around theaters in the UK, etc. Then we went to the States, and during that run, Jake Berry said to me, he said, listen, he says, I've got to go back to AC/DC. He says, because Mensch managed AC/DC at the same time. So basically, he says, so I need a production manager for America. And I said, yeah. And he says, they can't afford an LD and a production manager because they're only supporting. And I went, okay, I hear what you're saying. And he says, you were the production manager for the Rats and the LD. And I said, that's right. He says, so why did you take on the extra role? And he says, because you're going to be opening, because they're not big enough to headline anywhere. You're going to be opening for all these acts like Judas Priest and Ted Nugent and Scorpions and people like that. And I went, what's the money? And we were literally in a nightclub in Manchester, and Mensch was down the other end of the room. So Jake ran down the other end of the room, went blah, 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 back, said to me, he'd like to pay you this, but he says, I think you can get that. I said, get me that and I'll do it. So he went back down, and he goes back and he says, you're in. And the rest is history. I became the production manager, lighting designer for Leppard. And we went out then, and we finished that year out. We went out then in the next thing we did was we opened for Ozzy. It was Ozzy Osbourne, The Blizzard of Oz, and Leppard opened. So we went out on that for
that was in America.
That was in America, yeah.
Wow.
We went out and we did that, and we did. I think we did about 3 months on that, which was hilarious with Ozzy and Sharon. You know, it was brilliant. Never a dull moment.
Was that the Castle stage where they?
No, it was before that. It was as he was building. They just needed a good opener, and and Sharon, you know, she saw the lads and just went, "This is perfect. This is perfect." You know, so she phoned Mensch and said, "Listen, what about you guys coming out? This is a great compliment, you know, because it's two British acts, even though Ozzy's band was basically Rudy Sarzo on bass, Randy Rhoads on guitar, and Tommy Aldridge on drums, you know. But it was Ozzy as a British act, being British with a British opening act. So she just felt it would be a great package, and it was. It was a fantastic package, you know.
I can imagine. Wow.
So, but it was pretty much just like Ian Peacock was the lighting designer on that. On Ozzy, and it was just straight trusses, and it was pretty straightforward, you know. So we did that anyhow, and then we went on to a Blackfoot tour, and Banded Lights were the supplier on that. Michael Strickland, that's where I first met Michael Strickland, and he was the production manager and owner of the company and whatever, you know. So we opened for them, and that finished that year out. And then we did some of our own stuff, and then they went back into hibernation. Pete Willis, then he basically got let go. Phil Collin arrived into the band, and we they recorded Pyromania, and we went back out then, and we opened for Billy Squire, and. We did that. I think it was about 2 months around the States, and Billy was huge at the time, but he just needed that. He was going into, he was in the big arenas, and he just needed that act that would literally sell them out,
Yeah.
So basically Leppard was chosen, and we went out on that. And so we did a European tour on Pyromania. We started at the Marquee in London, which is a famous little club in London. And then we came to Dublin, and we did a show in a small club there, then Belfast, and then down through the UK, and a little bit of Europe, and then straight out then to start with Billy Squire. That tour was fantastic, really, really good. We met Charlie Hernandez on that tour. He was the stage manager at the time on that. Yeah, so basically, anyhow, we did that Pyromania tour, and I was we opened for Billy, and then as we got to the West Coast, they judged things at that time on merch, like as to how many people were coming to the shows, and they still do to a big degree, who's buying the shirts, So by the time we got to the West Coast, when we got to Portland, Oregon, like when we started out, it was like, Leppard were doing sort of 30% of the merch versus Billy 70, By the time we got to the West Coast, it had completely flipped. So it was 70, 30, 80, 20, it was getting stupid. And they could see it coming. So they decided to book the first, Pyromania tour, the first headline tour. So we went out on that, doing arenas, and I was production manager. Brooksy, who worked for Tasco at the time, he came in as the stage manager, but I was also the LD. And we went out on that, and we did that tour right through the States and everywhere, back to Europe, everything. We finished up in the States. We finished up at Jack Murphy Stadium, and in September, and the lineup was Def Leppard were the headliners. It was 55,000 capacity. Def Leppard were the headliners. Then it was Eddie Money, Motley Crue, and Uriah Heep. So Uriah Heep opened, I think, Motley Crue, then Eddie Money, and then Def Leppard. I think that was the way. I'm not sure, but I can clarify that for you. And that was it. Then we went to Hawaii, and then went to Europe and stuff. But you know, it was an amazing time. And we finished that tour. That was it. And then they went back in the studio. I went out and did all my other stuff. And they were in the studio then, and then Rick lost his arm, sadly. So we did a tour of Ireland here, just small venues as a warm-up. Because, you know, I had convinced them that they were saying that, you know, for tax reasons, they didn't want to spend all their, you know, give all their money to taxes in the UK because it was so high. It was way different to America, you know, it was just like ridiculous, you know. So they decided that they'd move offshore, and they were being suggested Holland and Paris and all these things. And I looked at them and I went, guys, you're English, you know, it's like you barely speak your own language fucking decently, you know, because they're from Sheffield, and they're all going, fuck you, you know. I said, listen, why don't you go to Ireland? I said, it has great new tax laws and all that, you know. And I said, it's great for musicians and stuff. And so, you know, Peter listened to me on that, and he went, really? And I went, yeah. I said, talk to Ozzy Kilkenny, you know, he's U2's accountant and blah, 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 you know, and Ozzy was a good friend of mine. So he spoke to him, and next thing, they were moving to Ireland. Wow. And that's why Hysteria was recorded in Holland and in Ireland. So Mutt came over to Ireland to put the thing together with them and stuff. And basically then Rick lost his arm, and everything was put back. But anyhow, we did this tour of Ireland, and, you know, just as a warm-up. We had a second drummer in, Jeff Rich, who was playing with Status Quo. And after Live Aid, you know, Queen had just exploded again. So after Live Aid, they went out on tour, and Status Quo opened for them. So Jeff had to go back and forward to Status Quo to Leppard, Status Quo, Leppard. And there was one night down in the, you know, very southwest part of the country, he basically, he missed a flight. And we were suddenly, you know, we were sitting there, and we've got Rick. We don't have Jeff. But Rick was playing like a Trojan. He was absolutely flying it, you know. And
this is before he had the electronic kit? Was he?
No, this is with the electronic kit. Okay. Yeah, we had the electronic kit. Well, what happened there, to bring you up to speed with that? Like, I don't know how much detail, but I'll give you the whole thing that as I know it, you know. We hired a guy called Steve Cater. Steve Cater was with Dire Straits. He was their boffin. He was their, you know, their electronics genius, you know. And we'd heard about him, so we hired him. And he came in to develop, you know, because Rick had, you know, he was just like, I'm going to play drums again. I don't care. I will do it. And because he was in Dublin, I'd see him, you know, and I'd go into the house, and you know, he'd be there. He'd come out and there'd be tears in his eyes, and he was just frustration trying to figure out how to make this happen. And he knew that he needed triggers, and he needed all these sort of things, which were very, very new at this point. You know, it was a very new situation. So he basically, he just plowed through it. And we got Cater for him. And Cater was he was from London. He was a great character and a very dry sense of humor. So Rick really liked him, and the whole band liked him, you know, because he just had this great sense of humor, but very, very dry, and, you know, but a genius. So he came up with these ideas and the pedals and how the whole thing, you know, how we could do all this. And basically that's how the first kit came together, you know. And this was the first outing with it, you know. This was like around small venues in Ireland, you know, 1,000 seaters. And I remember people I remember standing outside this old ballroom in a town called Ballybunion, which is like, it's got an incredible golf course. Like, I mean, you ask any PGA player, do you know Ballybunion? They'll go, oh, wow, what a great golf course. But the town is tiny. I mean, It is like literally maybe a population of 2,000. It's nothing. It's a blimp on a map. But it had this big venue that like held 2,000 people. And I remember these Americans outside going, Def Leppard here? Not a hope. Not a hope. This is bullshit. You know? It's like, no, it's really them. Bullshit. You know?
Wow.
So it was like they just couldn't believe that they were playing this night, you know? And I said, come on. I gave them some tickets and brought them in, and they were just like, holy shit. Yeah, this is how.
Wow. That's great.
So anyway, so we ended up anyhow at the next gig, and we'd know Jeff Rich. So the band sat with him and tried to persuade him and tried to persuade him and tried to persuade him. And eventually he just went, to hell with it. Let's do it. And he went out and he started playing, and Jeff suddenly arrived and he's playing away, and he just went, come on. And Jeff went, nah, this is brilliant.
That's awesome.
Not a hope in hell. So that kid sat there all night, and eventually he got up, I think, for the encore or something like that, and just played a bit just because it was there. Yeah. But it was a lot of tears and a lot of emotions that night.
Wow, I can imagine. Wow, that's special.
So we went down to the SFX in Dublin, which was a little 1,500 seater, and we did that, and then we went to the UK, and we opened for Ozzy and the Scorpions, and it was incredible. It was Monsters of Rock, 1986, and literally Ozzy, Sharon, the Scorpions, everyone, they were all on the side of the stage, and the tears in their eyes were incredible.
Wow.
So, wow. An amazing moment, you know?
That's great.
Yeah. So basically that took us into, you know, we were still waiting for Hysteria. So basically what happened then was, you know, we did we had a stage set designed and stuff, and you know, it was pretty much like a triangle, and it was going to be, you know, the Hysteria stage set, and they built it. Brilliant Stages out of the UK built it, and that's it in the pictures here. This was the plan to do the stage, which was a one-end stage.
Okay, gotcha.
And so basically, anyway, it was just like a triangle and stuff. And I'll start searching for these things, and I know the companies and everything, so I'll see who I get and whatever, you know. Great. I'm sure they have archives of it. So anyhow, so we were looking at this and everything, and then suddenly, you know, Peter Mensch, Peter was a very interesting manager. He was Q Prime. Are, you know, they're a massive organization, Metallica, you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Muse, you name it, you know. And this was their big band at the time, you know. So it was like, you know, Peter was all over it. And Peter said, you know, this is the stage set. So we'd go in and we'd look at it and we'd go, yeah, we can do this, that, and the other. And so we decided then, okay, so this is it. We'll plan Europe, and Rob McSween, the agent, he booked Europe for us, and so we were to launch in Europe and go out and do the tour. So, but they weren't big enough really to do this stage set. So they said, okay, well let's park that, because, you know, well, first of all, Peter said, I've got this great idea. Let's do In the Round. And all the band went, how the fuck do we do In the Round? He says, nobody's done it. You know, let's do it. So he brought in Charlie Cale from Brilliant Stages again, and Charlie worked with us again on this, and he'd worked on that. And so Charlie came in anyway, and He said, I want to do an in the round thing, So he came up with the concept of the in the round, and he worked it with Mensch and figuring out how we do it, and we raised the center and the whole thing and all that. So then I was out at that time. I was so busy because I had been doing, I'd met up with Paul Young at that time, who was massive in Europe. I was doing Pretenders, I was doing Adam Ant, I was doing Paul Young, and then I was going out on U2 Joshua Tree tour just as the crew chief.
Oh, wow. So
I basically had this going on as well. And Peter said to me, he says, look, can you be involved in this? And I went, I can and I want to be, but I said, I'm fucking, I'm all over the place here. I've taken on way too much work. He says, look, Howard Ungerleider is a great friend of mine. And I said, I know Howard. And he says, look, what about him coming up with something? So he looked at Charlie's drawing and he came up with the concept of the Octagon, And he said to me, he says, how are you with that? And I said, absolutely. I said, Howard, work away. I said, work away on it, do whatever. I said, put what all, and at that time it was Pars and a handful of Very Lights or whatever,
Yeah.
So basically, he got the thing drawn up and everything like that. And we needed that because we needed to get the weights done, because nobody had hung this amount in the center of the arena. Most roofs were good for one end of the arena and everything structurally was great there. But now you're in the center of the arena and now you're going out in winter and now you have snow loading on the roofs, etc. So if it snows, your loading's just dropped, because there's a shit pile of snow on the roof, especially in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And in Canada. So that all had to be taken into consideration. So again, we were sitting down and stuff like that. And Mensch said to me, he says, I think this is way too much, to do lights and production on this. And I said, Peter, I couldn't agree more. Ba-bam, Charlie Hernandez. Let's bring him in. So we brought in Charlie. So Charlie basically said, this is great. Delighted to be on board. This is fantastic. Howard, fantastic. And there was a guy, Adrian Selby, who basically became the project manager. And he worked for, he used to work for Tasco way back in the day. So he basically did the entire project management of it. And it
what
just
was his name?
Adrian Selby, Selby. So he coordinated the whole thing, putting the package together. So, the idea was I would run the show and I would obviously, be part of the design team, whatever, but Howard would do the initial concept to get that going. Charlie Cale did the stage set, did the whole staging and whatever. As we were looking at it all and everything, I just said, I said, that stage, it's black. It's boring. I said, something needs to happen there, and we had lights on the floor and everything. And I basically, Howard had done an initial thing and, I used some of that. And I certainly used, the 6 lamp bars he put in, I just changed bubbles in them or color or whatever, just to get what I wanted out of it. But he, that was his, he came up with the initial thing. And then basically, with the floor, I just said, why don't we get the album cover and do it in luminous paint, and put it on the floor. And that's exactly what we did. We painted the Marley in the album cover. So that's where that came from. And then we decided, we were talking about the opening and it was let's do a kabuki, And I mean, I'm not sure whose idea that was. It could have been Mensch's. It could have been Howard's. As I've learned over the years, the surest way to get yourself fired is to fucking put a kabuki on something, because So I don't think it was me. Maybe it was. Maybe I was that bloody green, you know. But anyhow, so we had lasers on it as well, and Mike Moorhead ran the lasers and stuff. So basically, that was all being put together, and Adrian Selby was doing that. But in the meantime, we had a European tour to do. So I took the European tour out as the production manager, lighting designer, and we went and we did Europe. And Steve Owens came over. Steve does Doobie Brothers and lots of different people. Steve was basically a very light guy at the time. So we spoke to John Wiseman, and Wiseman got us 24 very light VL1s. And so Steve and I went out in Europe with them, and we had just a generic system that I designed, and we programmed.
This is the end stage.
This is the end stage, yeah. And it was it was just a drum riser. It wasn't a big deal, but it was just to get us around there and get it done. So we went out and we did that tour, but we basically programmed the show, with looking forward towards the in the round. So we did that, and that was great, and everybody loved it, and all the cues, everything, they loved everything. So we got to the States anyway, and we went into Glens Falls Arena, and we did the rehearsals. So we put up the lighting rig, and as I say, it's like it was, we added spot bridges and put spots out on two sides, north and south, and then east and west would be the sides. So I literally just had one follow spot up each side, just to pick up if somebody come up on the side, because the whole thing was they were going to.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about how you managed the spot so that you didn't get crossing.
Yeah, it was to try and minimalize it without over saturating, and there was a lot of things that had to be taken into consideration. So to do 4-4-4-4 was just overkill. It was just too much, So I just thought, okay, I'll do 4 on the spot bridge south, 4 on the spot bridge north, and they'll be the key lights. And as soon as somebody, there was no way all 4 were going to come to the side, So I just thought, something, I'll just put a house spot each side and have them just pick up. If you see someone come up, my cue was basically, if you see someone come up there, go ahead and pick them up, and pick him up in the frame he's in. So, and I'd help them, in the cues and stuff like that. I'd just say, spot 4, your man is going to, spot 4, your man is going to go west. And I used to call that spot west. Your man is going to go west, and he's going to be in frame 2. So spot west, be ready to pick him up in the frame 2. And literally as he went up, he'd pick him up in a frame 2, and he'd follow him around. And then I'd call him out, and I'd, bring, whatever. So that was part of my cue system. So anyhow, we got to Glens Falls, and we put the rig up, and we focused it, and we did everything. And I think we were about 3 days into it. And I walked into the dressing room, and not into the dressing room, into the production office. And I just said, Charlie, I this is not working. And he says, what do you mean? And I said, everything I envisaged is not working. I need to change things. And he says, how much of a change do you need? And I said, I'll go talk to the band. I said, but I'm going to need overnights with the lighting crew. He went, okay, whatever we got to do. So I went in, I told the band, I said, it's looking like shit. It's not looking right. I said, I need to now change some of the Parcam bubbles to narrower. I said, I need a focus. I need to get, and the way I looked at it was that as I'm looking at it, I need to see a back truss focus with lots of beams, but the back truss focus has got to be a downstage truss. So an upstage truss focus from where I am has to be a downstage truss focus for the other side. So I've got to make those lamps work twice. So they've got to give me the look, and they've got to give me the key. So once I figured that out in my head, we literally went in 2 nights. I didn't rehearse with them at all during the day. Went in overnight for 2 nights, changed the thing around, and got it back up. And it was just like, oh my God, fantastic. This is it. We got it, you know?
Nice.
And in the meantime, Howard had been working on lasers with Mike Moorhead. He had done a lot of the graphics and stuff on it. So, you know, we had screens that came down on 4 sides and there was graphics and stuff on it. And then when it came to the actual beams, I basically did the beams and stuff like that for Pour Some Sugar on Me and Animal, you know, just there was all these beams shot out that, you know, so it was basically between us, you know, and Mike Moorhead, we come up with all that. So we played Glens Falls, and it was great. It was a great show. We went overnight to Lake Placid, and it's an arena that really isn't used. I don't even know if it's there anymore. But we got in there, and we were so far behind because it was a huge thing. Back in those days, it was massive. So by the time we got out, and by the time we got to Lake Placid, by the time we got up, and also because it had snowed heavily, we had to lose the 2 inner rings. So I had nothing. I had, like, a lot of it had gone. I just thought, oh my God, you know, I never thought of this, you know. But the biggest problem at Lake Placid was that, you know, not many people live up there. So we literally had 2,000 people in a arena. And it was like, so that was like 500 people each side of the stage. And we were all like going, holy shit, this tour is fucked.
Yeah.
And we were so down and we were exhausted. So so we went to the next one and then we did a tour. And a lot of people don't know this, but we did a tour, that tour that was put together. And it was 50, 60% houses.
Really?
It was not. It didn't do well.
Was the album selling at this point?
Not really. The album had come out and sort of just, you know, it just plateaued. It never hit the top or anything like that. And it was just bizarre. So, you know, and we had, like, at that time, it was 8 trucks. You know, that was huge back then. And Electrotech were the audio company. So they had 4 hangs. Robert Scoville was the sound engineer. And he designed the whole thing and made it all happen and whatever. And it was pretty spectacular. But basically we went on and we finished out that leg of the tour. And Mensch and Bernstein, you know, Cliff Bernstein, who's the other part of Q Prime, the 2 of them came and met with the band, and they just said, look, you know, we're going to send you off to Japan and go and do this, that, and the other, and whatever, you know, and a bit of Europe, and then come back, and we just got to work on the album. And so while we were away in Japan and some of Europe and stuff, some DJ picked up on there was strippers in Florida, I believe, in a strip club, and they all danced to Pour Some Sugar on Me. And they were doing the whole thing with the sugar, and, you know, became a big thing. And some DJ from a radio station saw this and went, what a fucking great track. And he started playing it. And then he said why he played it. And that picked up momentum. And the radio station suddenly got Pour Some Sugar on Me. And by the time we got back to the States, it was sold out. You couldn't hear it. It was multiple nights everywhere, like everywhere. It was insanity. So we did up until the summer. And because of what had happened, they thought, you know, we need to book state fairs and sheds and stuff. So let's roll out the stage set we've never used, which is this one here. So they rolled that out for one end. And we rehearsed at Alpine Valley in Wisconsin, and we rehearsed there for a couple of days, and then the 2 nights sold out, and then we did a summer run with that. And
I think I've seen some video of that on YouTube.
Yeah. And then basically we parked that up and went back to In the Round and just sold out multiple nights everywhere. Did the video In the Round in Your Face, all those things, and that was it. It was a massive hit. But the sad thing for Alpine Valley, and I've just got to tell you this, is that our absolute genius and wonder man, Steve Cater, who had developed the kit for Rick, he was out bike riding with Malvin, who was the guitar tech at the time, who moved on to become the tour manager. Him and Malvin were out cycling, and suddenly Malvin looked back and he saw Steve on the ground, went back, and Steve had fallen off the bicycle, and it turned out he had a brain hemorrhage, and we sadly lost Steve Cater.
Oh, man. And that was before the show?
That was before the show. So the opening night in Alpine Valley was a lot of tears and a lot of heartache for a lot of people, you know?
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that was it. So we literally were done, and we finished up in the Tacoma Dome. And that was the end of the tour. And that was sadly Steve Clark's last show as well.
Yeah.
End of an era.
Yeah. Can I ask you some specific questions?
Absolutely.
So when you were there in Glens Falls, kind of with the rig and trying to figure out how you were you had most of your cues from the European tour, and you were just kind of hoping that it was going to basically, work with the In the Round setup?
Well, you see, what I did was I basically looked at it in a situation of like, it's what I see. That's what people are going to see, is what I see, because I'm out front. So what I've got to do is I've got to create that 4 sides. So I've got to basically mirror that 4 sides. And because I used follow spots on them all, I had key lighting no matter what. So I had no worries about them going into the dark at any point where they couldn't be seen, because I had key lighting on them no matter what, Did
they have key lighting on them the whole time?
Well, yeah.
They have spots on them the whole time?
Yeah. So basically they were on them all the time, unless they weren't playing, and I'd fade them out. But I'd always have, like, if Joe was singing, I'd have him, in no color or whatever. And basically I'd have the others in a color. So it just meant that they were constantly covered. And that's what I put in my head. I've got to cover them with spots. And I always remember Nick Jackson was the account holder, or the account guy for Light and Sound Design at the time, because it was Light and Sound Design which was PRG in previous times. And I said to Nick, I need 5 spots. He said, they won't pay for 5 spots. And I said, a spot is going to go down one side. I said, and I'm going to have somebody in the dark, He says, well, you need to take that up with management. And we got into it. So eventually they agreed to give me 5 spots, so I had a spare, And so if a spot went down, like, there's no way over an audience you're going to go out and start repairing that spot. It's, it's health and safety, everything. Even back then, it was like, you could kill someone if you start bringing a tool bag up there,
Yeah.
So basically, anyway, we literally got the 5th spot that, I could transfer somebody across, to the 5th spot. But it was basically 4 spots on one end. Rick, his drum riser spun, so I literally had lights on him. So that was never an issue. He was the easiest one to light. But to get the rest of them, lit was mainly through follow spot.
So you had four on each end, north and south, you said? And those were all manned by crew that was traveling with the show?
IATSE. No. IATSE. It was,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Like literally the Hysteria tour in the round only ever did the USA.
Okay.
So it was IATSE. They basically manned us everywhere, and it was, and then, as I say, we had a fifth spot, but, we'd explain to them prior, if you have an issue, we may transfer you, but it was a proper walkway and stuff. And they were like, yeah, we're good with that, so they were on top of it. So yeah.
Great. You kind of mentioned some of the challenges. Were there any other challenges just putting on the show in the round besides some of the initial, you said when you first looked at it, it wasn't working. So you had to change up some of the beams and kind of just think about it. Was there anything else you can remember that was just a particular challenge as compared to doing an end show?
I think the biggest thing was fitting it into venues, I think it was just the roof, I mean, Charlie had more issues than I had,
Mm-hmm.
Although, as Charlie says, he says, bloody hell, he says, you were in my office more than any other LD because we had to figure things out, So, and then, of course, Charlie's, his, as I was saying earlier, young Charlie was born in the middle of the tour. So we were literally heading off on our second trip to Japan, I think it was. No, I don't know. It was the first trip, yeah. And Charlie had to, his child was on the way, so he says, I don't know what to do. And I said, Charlie, you go, you have your child, go, you and Lisa go and have the child. I said, and we will toast you from Japan. I said, I'll do the production, because it was back in one end again. So we literally went to Japan with one end because we were doing the Budokan and stuff, and you could never hang it in the round of the Budokan,
Yeah.
So we went back to a one end, and I did production and lighting again. And then when he, once we got back to the States, I went, Charlie, here you go, all yours again, and away we went.
So for the in the round setup, you didn't ever have like a B version. It was always, besides going to Japan and Europe, it was always the A show, and you just made sure the arenas were big enough.
No, there was many times we lost the center ring,
Yeah. You mentioned that in Lake Placid.
Yeah, we lost that, but I had my buckets, as everybody said. So basically, I came up with this thing. It was like a part, like a mole phase, but it was like I put aircraft landing lights in it, so it was 8. So it was basically, it was what was the configuration? I think it was how the heck? I'm trying to think of it now. I think it was 6 in a circle. No, 7 literally in a circle and 1 in the middle. But it created this beam. So you see these big bins up there, and they're very unusual. They were called the famous buckets, PHAMOUS, the famous buckets. And Charlie got a call later about them saying, what are these lights? And he says, they were designed by NASA. But it was a wind up for me. What I wanted to do was, I started calling moving lights swinging buckets, So I wanted to do a bucket of bulbs. So I did the bucket of bulbs with this configuration and the one in the middle. So and I put a flange on it so that it would create that beam. And it gave this massive big light beam,
And was this over
this
ring?
So there was 8 of them in a circle. It was on the second circle,
Okay.
So basically, or the second octagon, and basically they, if you see, it was like there would be on Pour Some Sugar on Me. It would it would go da 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 da, with the lasers, and then these lights would just go. There'd be big, powerful, big white lights would come down. And that was I got Light and Sound Design to build them specifically for me. But originally, I wanted them to be on for the end of the show. And it was a piss take on Very Light at the time. And Wiseman used to go, "You're an asshole, for doing this," because I was just taking the piss. And I said, Very Lights, I said, they're great. I said, but just because they move, people want to move them. They shouldn't just move for the sake of it. And I said, I'm going to make my own swinging buckets, because I used to call Very Lights swinging buckets at the time. So this is what I came up with. And the idea was that I'd have a mechanism that I could release them and they'd come down on bungees at the end of the show. And
Wow.
they'd literally just like bang, and they'd swing around the place with all these beams at the end. But of course, Leppard wouldn't pay for it. They just went, "Fuck you." So that was the idea. So it ended up being the famous bucket, And,
very cool.
And it was Willie Williams that had put it into my head, when I was out on U2, he just went, he says, "Fucking Very Lights." He says, "Fuck that shit," So it was like, it was a good laugh. It was a combination of just our sort of silly humor at the time. And,
Do you remember how many pars and how many Very Lights were in the rig?
I remember there was 24 Very Lights. I'm not sure of the pars, but I can figure that out, I'm sure,
And I had read that for the lasers, they were like trap doors that would open for the lasers.
Yeah, there was a small little thrust north and south, and basically it was all grated. So we had monitors under there, we had lasers under there. And any time that we used the lasers, they would literally lift one section out. It was literally I think it was about a 4x8. They would literally lift it and push it forward.
That was by hand.
By hand, yeah. They just lifted and, it was before all the technology of now. But they literally lifted and push it forward, and then they come out and they hit mirrors in the rig, etc.
And those came out for 2 songs.
No, they came out, what did we see? The first time we used them was Animal, and we just did a straight sort of beam shoot on, everything with the black, and it was just a beam shoot. We used them on Hysteria in graphics. We used them on something else in graphics. I can't remember. And we used them on Sugar. We used them on... I can't remember. Yeah, don't remember.
4 or 5 songs.
I'm sure I can research that for you.
Okay. And so and then you obviously had lights under the grates. Rick was on a grate, revolving grate?
Yeah.
He had lights under him?
Yeah, lights under him and lights behind him, that sort of revolved with him. Just a couple of powers and stuff,
Yeah. So after that tour, Def Leppard ends up going out in the round one more time.
Yeah.
Were you a part of that?
No. I, at that point, basically decided that my son was born in 87. He was born just before I went out on the Paul Young tour. And he, I didn't see him much that year at all. And then 88 was pretty much Hysteria. And then by the time 1990 came, my second son was on the way. And I just thought, I got to give some time to family. So I came up with a plan here. I'd met the managing director of Guinness, and I came up with a plan to design a mobile stage, which I did very successfully, and ran that for years. And I came off the road for a while. So I always remember it was in January, and Joe called me and he says, we're hearing rumors. And I said, they're true, Joe. And he says, so you're not coming back out with us? And I said, Steve's gone, and Steve and I were very close. And I said, I just don't think it's right for me at the moment. I just, my heart's not in it without Steve there. I need to look after my family, etc. And so I basically said, listen, thanks, but not for me. Yeah. And it just, my heart was broken with Steve. We were very, very close. And so Jonathan Smeaton did the next tour, and Butch Allen. Butch did, he ran the show, etc. And that was it. I'd moved on. But then, life moved on, and, Joe was living in Ireland, and Sav was here, and they got in my ear, and I went back.
And what year did you rejoin them?
I went back and operated in 2002, 2003. But again, family things, and I just went, look, I'll come out and I'll get it going for you, and that. And so basically did that. And then I went back to them in 2006. They were going out with Bryan Adams, and Kenji was in place by then. So they were real happy with him. But he needed the program for the Bryan Adams Def Leppard thing in the States. So they asked if I could operate, put a thing together for them in Europe and operate it, in the UK. So I did that. And then went back out again in 2009. Kenji couldn't do it. So I went back out, and but he had designed this entire thing. And it was, he's Japanese. And I was like, fuck, how am I going to make head or tail of that? So basically I brought Baz Halpin in, and Baz and I then designed the rig for 2009. Baz was a young kid when I first met him here in Ireland, and it was me that brought him into the industry. So I thought, technology's gone way beyond me here. So, I need to be very careful. I said, yeah, I'd love to do it just to do it. And so I just thought, sure, I'll bring Baz in. And Baz was like, yeah, I'll do that. So he came in, programmed the whole thing, did everything. And we did that.
So you told him what you wanted, and he just kind of...
Yeah. And then I operated it, because I was still very much, it was like, the Def Leppard, they didn't use Pro Tools or anything, so there was no time code available. There was nothing. So it had to be hand operated,
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun with it because, Baz and I, as I say, I first brought him into the industry, and we're still best friends, we're still great friends.
What was the last tour you were out on?
I did Def Leppard Journey. I put that whole thing together.
Okay, so that was what, 2018? A couple years ago?
2018, yeah. And then I went down from that to Nicki Minaj, which was very different. And then from that to Avril Lavigne, it was a smaller tour. She wanted to see what she could do, because she had been away. She got Lyme disease and stuff. And so we did a smaller sort of theater tour, and wonderful band, wonderful human being, sweetheart, and thoroughly enjoyed that. And then I went out. I'd worked with Jamie King on, he's the creative director for Madonna and everybody and anybody, but he had done Nicki Minaj, and then he invited me to go do Ricky Martin. So we put the Ricky Martin tour together for, we were working on it towards the end of 19. We rehearsed in Puerto Rico for a month in 2020. Josh Hutchins, he designed the whole thing for her, or for him, I should say. And we had a great time. Craig Caserta, he came out and programmed it, and it was a great tour. We were on 10 gigs in, and that was it. Plug was pulled. I think that's the lovely thing about our industry, that we've all come through it all. Like on Hysteria, here's a good one that I think will be interesting. On the Hysteria crew, Charlie Hernandez was the production manager. Dale Skerset, who is Opie, was a ground rigger, who is now the production manager for the Stones, AC/DC, and Guns N' Roses.
Wow.
Jake, and Def Leppard, it's amazing, because when you look at all the people that have gone through that, like Jake Berry, who's done Madonna, the Stones, AC/DC, Motley Crue, U2, you know. He was their first production manager. Opie, you know, he was a ground rigger on it. Charlie Hernandez, production manager on it. Myself, production manager, lighting designer. And then when I left, Mark Spring took over as the production manager. You know, who's now McCartney. And then when you look at Jonathan Smeaton took over as lighting designer, Butch Allen, you know, and there's a lot of huge names that went through the Def Leppard camp. And when I finished up with them in 2018, Chris Adamson took over, you know, who's petty and everything.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Phay. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care, mate.